Morticians, what is the most bizarre, uncomfortable, creepy, etc. case you've ever had to deal with? Dad was a coroner, if I recall correctly, before switching to doctor. I can never remember the details correctly for the medical stuff, but pretty much, the body getting examined was a former birthday clown. There weren't any external wounds, so he figured the cause of death was internal. The guy had gastroparesis, which to my dad meant, cool, stomach contents should be in good shape. His team opens the dude up and sees this flurry of crap. There's partially digested birthday cake, that edible confetti stuff, freaking streamers, and about a dozen Xanax next to all of it. Dad sifts through the stomach some more and sees what looks like a sponge of some kind. He pulls one out and it's a freaking sponge dino that comes in those capsules you drop in water. He finds more, about a small biome's worth. He thought he was getting freaking pranked. The story pieces together as the clown decided to end it with the Xanax and booze. He gets a store-bought cake and eats it with everything on it, then chases down some dino sponges just for the hell of it. Next story. Heard on the news a friend from my youth had been killed. I was terribly sad for him. He never could escape his demons and it led him down some terrible paths. Came into work a few nights later and there he was, face completely bashed in by a rock. This wasn't the first time someone I knew ended up in our morgue, but certainly was the saddest. Next story. My ex-in-laws were in the death business. They told me a story once about the county attorney whose wife passed away. The family was very wealthy and she had a mouthful of gold fillings. The attorney demanded that my in-laws retrieve the gold from her mouth. This required using a dental drill to drill down her teeth and dig out the gold. My ex-father-in-law complied with the attorney's wishes, but was physically ill about having to do such a needless step to this lady. Look, it's not like I believe in the old Egyptian way of burying people with a bunch of possessions so they have it in the afterlife. No, that's not really what I believe. However, when it comes to, gold fillings, I just think we should leave those in, to be honest. It simply feels wrong. I know they're not going to need it where they're going, but something about desecrating a corpse just is so innately disturbing, don't you think? If I were the attorney, I don't think I could ever ask for that of someone, although I guess it would be my job to. Next story. Doesn't exactly fit the criteria, but I'm going to tell the story anyway. I come from a smallish town. We have one mortician and everyone knows him. His daughter dated my cousin during this period of time. One year, a different cousin got into a bad car accident right outside of the county and died on impact. Of course, they called it in and he was asked to come down to the scene and retrieve the body. He was told the estimated age of the girl, the make of her vehicle, and which direction she was driving on the highway. The age and vehicle make matched that of his daughter who was visiting her boyfriend at the time. He couldn't get a hold of his daughter, so he showed up at the scene fully prepared to be picking up his own child. Sadly enough, this scared him so badly that this was the last funeral he ever performed. 8 years later and he still visits my deceased cousin's parents regularly just to check in. It's clearly stuck with him. Next story. I was a student at the time, but my first ever bloater was brought in, and once we popped him, insides were outsides and were everywhere. Would not recommend. On my first night shift, I thought staff were screwing with me because I kept hearing what sounded like breathing. Fresh body brought in and was releasing gas. I'd never dealt with anyone dying in the hour being brought in, so it was scary hearing this body breathing. I've been there when family members have passed away and witnessed breathing and limbs moving, so I know it's normal, but as a student, the staff like to screw with you. Bizarre one was piecing a guy back together after he took his own life by gunshot to the face. Family wanted an open casket. Had to try our best to then ask one family member in to see if they still wanted open casket because we just didn't feel like it was right. Dad comes in, sees that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't make him look the same as before, and agrees that family shouldn't see him this way. The day we delivered him to the funeral parlor, family changed their mind and has an open casket anyway. Found out the rest of the family didn't know he shot himself in the face. We ended up getting a letter of complaint from our other members of the family for the open casket. I finished as a student a few days after, but would still love to be in that career. OP, how the hell do you think after all that you've seen, yeah, you know what, this career does sound like it's for me? Like, hey, you do you, man. It's great that people are willing to do this because we need them to, but I just don't get how your brain gets there, man. Next story. Licensed embalmer here. I worked for large funeral homes and did coroner removals for a decently large city, and currently work as a trade embalmer. I've had lots of people who took their own lives. I've embalmed a 4-year-old that a cop blew a stop sign and T-boned their minivan. That one really hurt. But the one that was weird was this. 18-year-old girl took her own life. so I do the embalming like normal, even though it sucked having to do that. Now, the weird part is I get a text from my friends a few hours later saying that one of our friend's fiance's sisters took her own life, and if I knew anything about it. This really, really sucks because my friend's wedding is in 4 days. Turns out that 18-year-old was the sister to the bride, so I have to go to the wedding 4 days later while everyone is still grieving the loss and keep my mouth shut, as I'm the one who embalmed her. This was in a town of 250-ish thousand people. Next story. I work with the dead, procure eyes and corneas for transplant. While I was working on one guy in the medical examiner's office, they brought in another guy whose cat had eaten his face clean. Just his face, nothing else. It was a sort of decaying but still somewhat normal looking dude with a bright Halloween looking skull picked clean. Lots of murder victims, gunshots, car accidents, even one train accident. A guy who took his own life in front of his kids with a dog leash, which was still in the bag with his body. High caliber self-inflicted gunshot wound to the face with teeth and jaw and bits everywhere, and a bunch of gauze stuffed into the remaining hole. Let's not forget the guy in the decomp room who was just a pile of bones, hair, and leathery tissue paired with a bucket of goo. Crazy stuff, but hey, never a dull day. Next story. Not a mortician, but in middle school my friend's dad was. This wasn't a situation about a body, just the mortician himself. He was a single dad, and my friend's sister was going to a school dance but hadn't put on much makeup before, and she didn't want to be late. So the mortician's dad volunteered to do it for her because, quote, "I put on people's makeup every day." When he finished, she looked in the mirror and freaked out. "I look like I'm dead." He just nonchalantly said, "What did you expect? I've only ever worked with dead people before," and just walked away. I wish there was a picture of it. She looked like a deranged undead clown. Next story. Okay, so this isn't exactly matching the question, but close enough. About 7 years ago, my friend took a gig as a custodian for a funeral home. The job description itself sounded great from what he told me. It was graveyard shift and not full-time, but the pay was good. The funeral home was pretty small. Actually been to some funeral services there before. Basically a small, medium-sized chapel, an extension on the side room to seat more people, and then a hall with bathrooms and a few offices. Next to the funeral home was a separate garage-looking building where the mortician would take care of his business. Okay. Now let's get to the story. The guy only worked at the job 6 days before leaving. Here's how he described it to me. First few days went okay. He was nervous about working there at night, but was able to brave it out. His 4th day he finishes the main building and goes quickly to check the second building. From how he explained it to me, he actually didn't really need to clean in there as much as do a walkthrough. He goes in, quickly looks around, and then starts to leave. Then at the last moment he hears something drop and hit the ground. He stops and stares back for a moment and decides, screw it, I don't care. This is where crap gets weird. He walks back inside the main building to put away supplies when he swears he catches what looks like someone sitting in one of the pews get up and walk away. This was only from the corner of his eye, but it was enough to stun him in fear. He takes a moment to gather himself, then walks out and locks everything up for the night. Just at that last moment, he hears a loud bang like a door slamming. He bolts to his car and speeds home. The following days didn't have anything drastic like that, but the single event was enough for him to know the job just wasn't for him. Narrator's commentary. Do I think corpses are gonna come alive and get me? No, I don't. Would I take any job around dead bodies that was called the graveyard shift? No, I wouldn't. I hope that clears things up. Next story. My brother told me a story of when one of his friends was a mortician's assistant. One time he had to work on a guy who had taken his own life by shooting himself in the head with a shotgun. He said the guy kinda looked like Sid from Ice Age. That wasn't the worst, however. The worst part is how he felt about the whole situation. He apparently felt disconnected, not registering that this body was once a living man and not just something to clean up. My brother said he quit that night. I mean, you need that level of disconnection, to be honest. You can't mourn every single person that comes in when you do this kind of work. It just wouldn't be sustainable for so many reasons. I think there are truly a very few select people who can do this kind of job. And it does require a little bit of a scary level of, I don't know, almost a lack of empathy, or just removing yourself from the situation. Dissociation, almost. But yeah, definitely not everyone's cup of tea. Next story. Not a mortician. This comes from my mother back when she was a teenager. Guy she knows takes a job with the local funeral home. He works the graveyard shift. All was well for the first few months. Dude is often weirded out at work, claims that the building is haunted. Earlier in the evening, they get a call from the hospital saying that they have a lady there ready for pickup. They pick her up. Guy is freaking out, says he has a bad feeling. Later in the evening, Mortician has to step out for a bit, leaving Guy there alone with the dead lady. He goes about his work, still a little freaked out. Suddenly, he hears this low, soft moan. He swears it's just his mind playing tricks on him, goes about his business. He hears it again, a little louder than the last time. It's late, he's alone, he's probably just hearing things. Maybe the pipes are settling. The plumbing is old after all. Short time passes, and it's louder. At this point, he is sure he is not just imagining things. He knows he heard the dead lady moan. His first thought was the mortician was screwing with him. He's been shaken all evening and this jerk is pranking him. He marches over, "Oh, very funny, you jerk." Yanks back the sheet covering the dead lady, expecting to find the mortician somewhere around her. Dead lady grabs the guy's wrist. He lets out this scream and bolts for his car. Actually, no. He bolted for the door, forgetting his car, and ran all the way home. Turns out old lady wasn't dead. Hospital got it wrong. Hooray, 1950s medicine. She had been in a coma or something, and they'd been sure she had passed on earlier that morning. She woke up at the funeral home and scared the ever-loving hell out of the assistant. He quit that morning, said he would never set foot there again. Next story. A writing professor of mine used to work in small-town journalism and decided to interview some folks from the local retirement home to get a close-up view of this town's history. One of his interviews was an ancient retired mortician who told him a rather interesting story. Shortly before 1920, two teens were going to a school dance in a blizzard. The carriage they had taken got stranded and the boy went for help. The girl unfortunately froze to death in the carriage in an upright, seated position. Apparently, the mortician had to sit her in a rocking chair in front of the fire to thaw her out before he could go about his usual business. Next story. Mom was a mortician. Of the stories she's told me, creepiest would either be the guy that had his face eaten off by wild boars while hunting, I guess he wasn't that good at it, or the guy who fell into a wood chipper. Funny, the poor word choice. Thing was, I was at a breakfast a few days later where fellow high schoolers were trying to gross out the girls at the table, and when they pointed out I wasn't really bothered by it, I kept chewing and said, yeah, my mom got that guy, and said it was freaking gross. Everyone goes silent. I stopped chewing and looked up to everyone looking pale. I shrugged and said, "Oh, y'all forgot she's a mortician, didn't you?" and kept eating. Uncomfortable for her was one that was also kind of sad. This woman was morbidly obese. Like when they somehow all got her on the gurney at her home, when they were pushing it out, the wheels were pushing indentations down into the wooden floors. Now, this woman is what some bullies would call a whale. I wouldn't, but hey, we know jerks. Well, apparently this woman loved the crap out of some blue whales. Family kept going on and on about it. So the time comes for them to bring the clothes for her wake. They bring a big blue muumuu and a gaudy blue whale brooch. Then they hand her the CD to play. Usually it's church hymns or sad country songs, etc. No one listens to it before because why would you? So the service starts, Mom pops the CD in, boop, goddamn blue whale calls fill the funeral home. My mom was very professional with her job, but every funeral director had to excuse themselves to compose themselves. Next story. Not me, but my best friend works in the death business. So, since she doesn't have a Reddit account, I'm going to steal her karma because this is my favorite story. She tells me all sorts of lovely things about her job and the recoveries she has done, but my favorite involves a gurney and some stairs. To set the scene, a family called in that their mother had passed in her apartment. Third story, narrow halls and no elevators. Anyway, she goes to third story, narrow halls and no elevators. Anyway, she goes to pick up the body to take back to the funeral home with an assistant. So they get up there and lift this woman who is close to 300 pounds onto the gurney and begin their journey down to the van. Mind you, the whole family was there and pretty much in hysterics and crowd around as they make their way to the stairs. With family watching, they make it about halfway down the first flight of stairs when the body starts to slide. There's no way to reposition, so my friend who's at the foot of the gurney is now about butt level to the freshly deceased. So, trying to make the best of the situation, they continue their way down and try not to shift the body anymore. The thing about dead bodies is that gas starts to exit pretty quickly. And I'm sure you know where this story is going. The body started letting out farts straight into my friend's face. Every step they take, this poor girl has to keep a straight face while getting crop dusted by a dead lady with her whole family watching. Next story. Story from a friend of a friend. She, the mortician, met some guy at the bar. They hit it off and she gave him her number. Within a couple days, she finds out the guy died in a car accident because his body ended up at her place of work. Before the funeral service, she receives several calls from an unknown number, and whenever she picked up, there was no response. Eventually, she got the eerie hunch that it may be him and proceeded to address him by name. Tells him to pass in peace and stop calling. It worked. Next story. Uncomfortable, being trapped in the morgue alone during a hurricane. Our morgue was basically in a basement type situation and the hospital was near a main waterway that flooded. I had to move all the bodies to the highest cabinets, pray the generators would keep everyone cold, and was standing on my desk for about 2 hours when someone finally came for me. Bizarre would be a drowned guy who was DOA, and once locked up in the cabinet, a tapping noise started coming from him. It was a crab that had made itself at home inside of him, and when it got cold, he wanted out. Creepy was when we got some people who were doing bath salts and had eaten other people. They looked crazy even in death. Next story. Not a mortician, nor is this a mortician-specific story. I figure you just want creepy dead body crap. I was an EMT who got access to a bunch of places and experiences because I'm me. Hanging out in the morgue, picking the brain of the guy on shift during graveyard at Martin Luther. Had a corpse sit up on one of the gurneys while mid-conversation. I go pale. He just looks at me and says, "Yeah, they do that sometimes." Next story. Most bizarre. Particularly difficult family. None of them could agree at all on what to do with their dad. One faction wanted burial. The other was demanding cremation. After much shouting, they finally agreed on a compromise. They wanted us to cut their father's body in half. That way, one half could be cremated and the other half could be buried. I had to explain to the unfortunate arranger, who at this point looked beyond exhausted, that no, we could not saw a human body in half because it would be very illegal and very messy. Most uncomfortable. I'm 5'3" and was about 120 at the time. I was sent on a removal at a private residence with my supervisor. We get there and the family of the deceased consisted of half a dozen or so very tall men, each one of them well over 6 feet tall. Coincidentally, my supervisor was also male and unusually tall. They greeted him cordially, but as soon as I entered the home, it was like a switch was thrown. Every single one of them looked at me with pure contempt. I was not spoken to, only stared and glared at. They would not allow me to touch their father/grandfather. I was shouldered out of the way and blocked by the grandsons. I don't intimidate easily, but I had a wall of hostile giants staring me down from inches away. Once the deceased was on the gurney, they refused to even allow me to push. They assisted my supervisor themselves. It was really, really uncomfortable. The only thing that my supervisor and I could think of was that they didn't think I was strong enough to lift the body. Being small, I got that from time to time, but people were usually trying to be helpful. This was pure anger and hostility. Next story. I work in the industry. The creepiest thing I've seen/had would be one of my first pickups. There was a humidifier in the room, but I didn't know about it. I thought the deceased was still alive and wheezing. The most uncomfortable would probably be a guy in a halfway house style place, and there were people everywhere. Just a strange situation. Or a lady that was a crazy hoarder, or the time someone died at a huge party in the front yard. You ain't experienced life until you see a 2+ week decomposed body that's been in the heat. I didn't know bugs could be so big. Have a colleague that had a person who passed away 6 weeks earlier, said it was mostly liquefied. I have to say it has been the most humbling experience personally. There are some bad eggs, but overall most people are amazing, and you really appreciate those people that have lived such good lives. Don't leave your family for granted. I see it all too often when someone dies. Family tear each other up over money and petty feuds. Give your loved ones love and respect. Next story. The most bizarre happened when I was apprenticing. I worked with a senior funeral director on Sundays, just me and him. I'd been working for about 2 years when he passed away suddenly from simultaneous kidney/liver failure. The most surreal thing was transporting his body after the embalming was done back to the funeral home where we worked. Next story. Lady I work with used to pick up the bodies for the coroner. One time they had to collect a woman that was laying in a very hot attic apartment for a couple of months. All her liquids ran out onto the floor and dried, and when they tried to pick her up, she started coming apart like an overly tender turkey. Her coworker sent her to the van to get more bags, and when she got back, he had finished bagging the lady. Classy. Changed how I think about turkey. Next story. I'm still working on my licenses, so I'm not officially a funeral director and embalmer yet, but I've been going to the medical examiner's office to practice embalming with my school for several months now. The people we work on down there are not in very good shape, usually dead at least a month before we get to see them. Needless to say, it's not a one-artery, low-formaldehyde job. Each week we raise a minimum of 6 arteries, both carotids, both femorals, and both axillaries, plus the 2 radials if there's some trouble getting fluid distribution to the hands and forearms. To put into perspective, a typical funeral home case would only need 1, maybe 2 arteries depending on the embalmer's preference. There aren't a lot of creepy or bizarre cases that stick out in my mind, but uncomfortable things definitely come up. Whenever there's a young person on the table, it's sad. The degree of decomp can lead to a lot of difficult nights. The smell alone can really get to you. The thing that always spooks me, though, is when I'm raising an axillary artery. The site that we look for is the area directly distal towards fingers away from body mass to the armpit. There are a lot of tendons and such in there as well. When you're holding the person's arm up, digging around near the tendons, sometimes the arm will move. It happens a lot, but I still get momentarily terrified when the person grabs me. Other than that, there's not much I can contribute to this question. I know some secondhand stories from other people, but anything directly from me isn't too exciting. I have lots of stories of conventionally gross things, but nothing really bizarre. Next story. We picked up someone who took their own life on a major holiday. Thanksgiving or Christmas, I can't remember. Took her back to the funeral home. Undressed her and had to wait for medical examiner. Family decides to cremate. We addressed her for a viewing. Everything was normal. Later that day, she was ready to be cremated. I put her in, started the machine, and went back inside. I had to embalm someone else. About an hour in, I heard like 5 loud pops. First, I thought it was a pacemaker, a brain stimulator, something I had missed. I let it finish, swept it into the tray, and a small handgun came out. Now, I had seen all of her. Seriously, where did she have that at? The only spot left was... The question is why? It's been 10 plus years and I'm still like, what the hell? Next story. Not a Morticians story, but my dad was in the Coast Guard in the early 70s, stationed in San Francisco. Between the Golden Gate Bridge and Bay Bridge, they would get a lot of jumpers, and the coasties had to retrieve the bodies. At night or in bad weather, they would sometimes take hours or even a day or more to find. One day they retrieved a body, and the body was being eaten by crabs. Dad said there were more than a dozen crabs all over the body. The body was basically a big piece of crab bait. Some other coastie on the boat is pulling the crabs off the body, putting them in a cooler. Guy says to my dad, "My wife loves Dungeness crab," and apparently was notorious for being the guy who claimed the crabs. This is a serious question. Would you need a license for that? I feel like you must, right? There's some hunting or game laws about that. Or I guess more specifically fishing. That might be a whole separate thing. I'll be honest, this is really out of my field of expertise, so I'll let the comments tell me. Next story. Not me, but my dad and his friend, the mortician, Mr. Mort. My dad was doing some business on the other side of the state, pretty close to where his friend Mr. Mort lived. Mr. Mort invited him for a coffee, but he said, "Hey, while you're here, can you help me with a particularly heavy one?" Meaning a large body needed to be cremated. My dad was in prime shape and he said, "Sure." There was a 350 to 400 pound, 25 to 28 stone lady who needed to be moved from a gurney to the conveyor belt contraption to be rolled into the crematorium furnace. Normally, she'd be placed in some kind of cardboard coffin, but she was simply too large, so she had to go in wearing a hospital gown. After some planning and effort, they successfully moved her over to the belt without dropping her, pushed her into the furnace, and turned it on. The crematorium was nearly automated. Basically, push a button and it went through everything it needed to do to properly turn whatever was inside to ash. So my dad and Mr. Mort said it and walked down the street for a coffee. About 20 minutes later, they see a fire truck go by and think nothing of it. Then, another one goes by. This was a small town in western South Dakota, so there weren't many fire trucks. They walked outside and there were flames coming from the crematorium, and some oil was coming from the building, and the smell of burnt ham. What happened? The lady was so large that there wasn't enough space around her body in the furnace to generate the heat necessary to properly turn her to ash. But there was enough heat to melt her skin and turn her fat reserves into hot oil leaking out of the crematorium. The oil had set the building on fire. Thankfully, it was in a separated garage, so the entire mortuary didn't go up in flames, and flaming oil started to flow down the driveway and down the street. The first fire engine was parked too close to the fire, and the hot oil flowed past the tires on one corner, then melted and popped them. So you had a bit of pandemonium of firefighters spraying the flames and others jumping into the 2 fire trucks to move them away ASAP. Sorry for the abrupt ending, but I don't remember anything about the aftermath. Next story. So many, but you get used to it. Fat people purge when they die and usually end up with vomit all over their face from the weight on their gut. I end up feeling resentful of some very overweight people because I know I'll have to pick them up when they die, and there's a chance it'll throw out my back. Summertime equals bugs. Babies just look like they're sleeping. Very peaceful. Coworker unknowingly picked up his own estranged son who had overdosed in a car. Picked up a 4-year-old boy in Batman pajamas. Won't ever forget that. That one was the worst. Also, since I have you, I've noticed an uptick in young teens taking their own lives. If you have someone in your life who's a young teenager, or anyone really, check in with them. Let them know they're loved. I'm tired of picking up dead, bullied girls. Maybe I was wrong when I said you had to be calloused. OP seems to have a lot of empathy for the people they work with, or work on, whatever. But there was a lot of heart in OP's post. I can tell they're a really genuinely caring person. How you reconcile that with working with the dead people all day, I don't know. But OP, good on you. Next story. Not a mortician, but a gravedigger. At 18, it was my first full-time job. I was learning the ropes and the boss man told me to mark out a grave. A wife was joining her husband many decades after his interment. My coworker taught me how to spec out an adjoining gravesite, split the tombstone in half, move over 6 inches, then plot the new grave with string in the prescribed dimensions. I did that. Then the backhoe arrived. As the backhoe guy dug the grave, a problem emerged. We could see bones in the dirt. My coworker stopped the backhoe guy and started yelling at me. I told him I marked the site exactly as he said, 6 inches to the left of the center of the marker, then 3 feet wide, 8 feet long, etc. I did as told, but it appears the husband wasn't sighted correctly and was not buried in a vault. His cheap pine coffin had rotted, and he was everywhere. But it was still my fault, apparently. The backhoe dug down an extra foot into the husband's side of the site. I was tasked to jump in and reinter all the bones on his side of the site. So I jumped in and packed all those bones and dirt into his side. My coworker and the backhoe guy had a laugh while yelling at me about bones I had missed and making me pack them in. We walled up his side of the grave nice and even, then overpacked it a bit and finished up the wife's grave. It was some grisly crap, man. But hey, it was 1982 and I was making $10 an hour, which was big money. With great wealth comes great responsibilities. Next story. My dad is a mortician. We had actually lived above the funeral, and my life had been just like my girl. He's been a mortician for over 40 years and has tons of stories. The worst by far is the human soup guy. Apparently, this elderly gentleman passed away while having a bath with the water still running. He was living alone in the house with a very little family. I don't remember how long he was in the bath before someone found him. My dad goes to pick up the body, and it's human soup. The hot water constantly running and the amount of time caused his body to turn to mush. He said the smell was the worst he ever smelled. He got back to the office later that day and his boss told him to throw away his suit and he'd buy him another. Next story. Not a mortician here, but related. My father passed away when I was quite young in a head-on collision with a logging truck. Safe to say, the body was not in a good state. Here's the messed up part. My grandma, whose only child had died, busts into the funeral home and demands to see the body. The funeral director suggests against it due to his state. She wants to anyway. As he's bringing her in there, says, "You'll want a chair for this." In she goes, and she pulls out a freaking disposable camera and starts snapping photos. Doesn't even bat an eye at what she's seeing. The story goes on to get even more weird, but that's for another time. Narrator's commentary. No, OP, the story is for now. What are you talking about is for another time? Why would you stop there? What was she doing with the photos? I have to know. Please. I'm currently pleading to a script of words. I don't even see the original Reddit post. So, yeah, that's where my sanity's at right now. Next story. I worked as an autopsy lab assistant at a local medical examiner's office on the night shift. This usually meant I was working alone at night between 2 freezers stocked with the various bits and remains of individuals, unless a doctor needed to do a late-night autopsy for religious purposes, or an investigator or police officer needed to fingerprint a body. We only got those whose cause of death needed to be verified, and usually meant we got the interesting cases. Interesting job, so ask away. The ones that really annoyed or bothered me after a while, annoyance is part of the detachment and making it just a part of the job on my end, I'm seeing up to 100 fresh corpses a week, were the individuals that were extremely obese, talking 500 pounds or so. The one that sticks out is a woman who was 510 pounds and was hit by a car and ejected at high speeds and then hit by an 18-wheeler. Now imagine 500 pounds of hamburger helper with large bits of organ and bone mixed in with a few chunks of leg. And that was a fun bag to try and prep and x-ray for autopsy. Having to pull parts of a dude out of a bucket and piece him together like some macabre jigsaw puzzle was also a very interesting second day as well. Someone who took their own life via crossbow was pretty cool, you don't see that every day. And the most interesting that I can share was a murder via katana. We were all super interested to see what that looked like, and it turns out it was one perfect stroke between the ribs into the heart. No bones were hit, just the heart. We joked about a master ninja hunting the city for weeks after. There are much more crazy ones, but it would be way too easy to identify my area from them, and families don't need that head and heartache from Reddit's long reach. The worst is always decomposing bodies and water finds. It's the worst smell of the bunch by far, and the spongy, soupy texture bodies get from long times in an aquatic environment is the absolute worst. They tend to burst everywhere when you cut them open too. It was a sad job most of the time, as we only got those who suffered a violent death that needed investigation. Lots of children and people who were clearly failed by society. Next story. I worked in IT at a very large Midwestern hospital. If there was a computer in the room, my badge would open the door to the room, which was neat. I've been in colonoscopies, fixing their camera computer with a patient on the table, been witness to a C-section, you name it. The hospital has an attached training school that had a giant dummy room. Any procedure had a dummy they could use for training. I went to their stage OR room to fix a wireless mouse that was acting up. On the table was an OR draped dummy that was just from clavicle to crotch. No appendages, just torso. A side note, this training school is really into suspension of disbelief. Even when you're working on a dummy, this is a real patient and is referred to as such. I fixed the mouse, and being the social person I am, and helped by the fact I had just run my last ticket, I start talking to the stage OR nurse. Wow, that dummy's really cool. I didn't know we had any that had cyber skin. No, it's real. Yeah, I know. All our patients in the training school are real. Can I touch it? It looks really neat. She looks at me very confused and concerned. I mean, I guess, but it's real, so I'd wear gloves. Me to me. I'll just humor her. I didn't know they had such neat stuff in here. I walk up to the draped dummy, and since it was OR draped, I could only see the area between the nipples and to the end of the rib cage. Wow, I didn't realize they made dummies with nipples and nipple hair? I reach out to touch it, and freckles. My finger makes contact, and blood splatter. The dummy's really cold, and the thawed skin moves only slightly over what seems to be frozen muscle underneath. Oh my god, this is real. I tried to warn you. Sorry, I'm just an idiot. I then silently apologized to this young man's torso. Next story. Well, this wasn't really a mortuary, but I was a student many years ago in the anthropology department at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Bill Bass, a sort of P.T. Barnum of forensic anthropology, not a faker but a hell of a promoter, was the department head, and a major focus of the department was forensic anthropology. This was also before DNA testing, so skeletal forensics was essential in identifying bodies that were partially decayed. Dr. Bass would get about 15 to 20 cases every year, decayed or skeletal remains to hopefully identify or at least profile race, sex, approximate age, any distinguishing characteristics, and sometimes cause of death. Usually these were vagrants, crime victims, or just historic or prehistoric Native American remains. One time in West Tennessee, they found a clothed but fully skeletonized body in a patch of dense vegetation in a little town in West Tennessee. The local sheriff and coroner loaded the body in the back of a pickup truck and drove the corpse all the way across the state, 400 miles, to Knoxville so Dr. Bass could do an ID. When the truck arrived, Dr. Bass went out and opened the body bag to find a complete skeleton that remained fully dressed. He looked the body up and down, and then reached into the front pocket of the corpse's jeans, pulling out a wallet, which he opened to read off the name, address, race, height, and hair and eye color of the deceased. The sheriff and the coroner were a bit embarrassed. It turned out the dead guy had only been missing for about a week, but in the dense foliage of a West Tennessee thicket in midsummer, the bugs and beetles had completely stripped his bones of flesh. Bass did a follow-up to make sure the driver's license and corpse were a match. Dr. Bass did many interesting cases. He founded the infamous Body Farm, has written several books, fiction and nonfiction, and has featured, in fictional form, in many of Patricia Cornwell's crime novels. Okay, 2 things. First of all, for some reason in this thread, Beatles was capitalized like the band. Hilarious. Second, OP, what's the Body Farm, man? I'm gonna need a breakdown of that one, I think. Because right now, it doesn't sound so good for boy Dr. Bass. I'm sure it has a logical explanation, but it's a horrifying name. Next story. Worked in a mortuary for a few months because I needed a job and it was at night. My job pretty much was checking the bodies as they were brought in and put them in cold storage. Anyway, one night they brought in 2 bodies back to back from a convalescing home. I didn't have time to put the first away yet, so I put it off to the side while I signed in the new delivery. The people leave and I go back to the first body and noticed it wasn't exactly as I left it. When I left, the body was flat on its back, and when I got back, it was sort of scrunched up. I backed the hell out of the room and just sat down. The mortician came out and saw me pale as a ghost. I told him what happened and he laughed. He then proceeded to explain to me sometimes a body will curl up after death because of rigor mortis, and after that's done, it'll go back to being limp. He proceeded to tell me that some cases are so bad that the bodies sit straight up. Yeah, screw that. He ended up putting the bodies away, and I spent the rest of the night freaked out. Next story. During high school, I got a job for the local funeral home as an assistant of sorts with responsibilities including picking up deceased from their homes, driving the hearse, digging graves by hand, cleaning up scenes where they took their own lives, and passing out bulletins at funerals. Paid $25 an hour in the early 2000s, so cannot complain. This one funeral I worked at had a man who was cremated who was a bit of a drunk with a large extended family. Per his wishes, his ashes were put in a beer stein and his memorial service involved large amounts of ethanol in various forms. It was a happy service as far as these things go, until the deceased's best friend pulled out a karaoke machine and wanted to play a recording of a song that he and the deceased wrote while drunk. The name was, I quote, "I'm a fat ass." The sound was unintelligible except for the chorus, which liberally used the song's title. Everyone breaks down crying and starts singing along. I excused myself to find somewhere to laugh quietly. Next story. I had a friend who was dating a guy who worked in a morgue. One day she finds pictures that he had hidden, which showed him desecrating different bodies. It's horrifying to think that someone can do this, but it's personally horrifying to think of someone assaulting my dead body. It's become a personal phobia. Hey, OP, she broke up with him after this, right? Please tell me she broke up with him, right? Next story. Not a mortician, but I'll tell my story of encountering my first dead person. I think I was about 12 years old and I was on a vacation to Austria, a beautiful city with lots of these trams going up and down hill. We'd already heard the ambulances, and after crossing a street with my father, I noticed an ambulance and people climbing out of it frantically. Looking closer, there was this mangled body that had gotten under one of the downhill trams. His face was mashed and there was so much blood pooled around him. My father quickly grabbed me by the arm and pulled me away. I still remember that clearly. Next story. I was working as a bouncer in a strip club when this happened. Guy comes in and proceeds to get super drunk until the bartender cuts him off. He decides it's time to go. So to keep him from driving while still drunk, we try to convince him to stay and have a few more table dances, stay and enjoy some free sodas, something. Anything, basically. We just don't want him to leave until he's had time to sober up, and he just keeps repeating, "Nah, man, you don't understand. I really gotta go." Over and over. We follow him out to the parking lot, still trying to convince him to stay and sober up. We follow him to his vehicle and suddenly realize, dude drives a freaking hearse. All I remember is somebody saying, "Please don't tell me you have a body in there, man." Then this guy gets a funny look on his face and says, "Yeah, I do. I'll show you." My coworkers and I, too stunned to react, just stand there while he opens the rear door of the hearse and opens the coffin. Inside, we see a nice-looking older gent, dead as a freaking doornail, and already prepped for his funeral. The drunk guy then says, "You see, This is why I gotta go. I'll get in trouble if my boss realizes I stopped on the way again. Let me stress, he said, again. This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. TLDR, alcoholic stops for a drink while on the clock. Poor dead stiff gets one last trip to the titty bar. Next story. I had a summer job one year when I was at university, nearly 40 years ago, as an orderly at the local hospital. I was assigned to the morgue, and when a patient died on the ward, we would go up and bring the body back down after the nurses had cleaned the person up and family had said their goodbyes, etc. One day we had to get this woman who died during the night. She must have been 30 stone. Docs decided on an autopsy, so we had to move her from the gurney type thing to the slab. As I was the young guy, the experienced orderly said that I had to take the head. This woman was gargantuan. She was also slippery, like her skin was greased. I lost my grip and dropped her, and her head smacked onto the floor. We got her up on the slab, and the doc came in, and there was blood pooling under her head. The drop had cracked her skull open. He had a look and said, it was a good thing she was dead, because that would have ended her. Next story. I work in forensics, specifically as an entomologist. I extract insects from decomposing bodies to estimate the time of death or supplement existing evidence. It's as grotesque an occupation as you might imagine. The most odious cadaver was the partial skeletal remains of an 8-month pregnant mother who gave life to a plethora of bugs, botflies, and moth larvae who were consuming her hair like some monstrous funeral shroud. The tiny bones of the baby were disintegrating under the unrelenting feasting of ham beetles as its flesh was too dry for bugs to find purchase. They preferred the malleable flesh of the mother's face and breasts. Observing the corpse, her exposed womb appeared to be giving birth. Many adult beetles were scuttling over her pubic bone and into the cradle of her pelvis. She was supine. Her limbs were not splayed in distress, but unfortunately her expression was indiscernible due to the divots of botflies imbued in the flesh of her cheeks. Then I began my extraction. It was a drug-induced taking of one's own life, which encapsulated the tranquility of her and her child's death. OP has a knack for writing truly the most horrific things I have ever read. This feels straight out of a Resident Evil game. Are you kidding me? Horrifying, revolting, everything. OP, you have a very niche, very disgusting job, but I'm sure you know that. Next story. I'm an OBGYN, but when I was a med student, I saw a weird case come into the ED. Woman in her late 60s, no known history on her, found by a friend after a week of not picking up the phone, laying on the floor of her apartment naked. When she came in, she was straight yellow, like street sign yellow on every inch of her body. I thought she had body paint on, but it must have been some catastrophic liver failure because she had crazy fluid retention in her abdomen as well. She was unresponsive, cardiac arrest. We started CPR, putting in a central line to her leg for fluid resuscitation. Got an EKG hooked up, but realized the EKG leads weren't sticking, and that there was this red crap getting on our hands and scrubs with a funny smell. In addition to and separate from the yellow skin, she was covered in ketchup, neck to shins. The EMTs had no idea how or why, and we never found out ourselves. Next story. This is my most peculiar call I ever went on. It was my birthday last year and I was on call. I get a call at 3:30 a.m. that we have a residential death. Our medical examiner deputy called the funeral home and was told to bring reinforcements. I meet up with a coworker and we get to the house about 30 minutes later. The ME pulls us aside and tells us the guy is in the basement. He's 6'8" and probably 300 pounds. So there are just 3 employees of the funeral home and our ME at the house. By the grace of God, we get this guy onto our cot. But then we have to get this guy up a flight of stairs. The 2 older guys go up front and I take the back with my coworker. When you take a cot up a flight of stairs, you really don't know how hard it is until you get both sets of wheels on the stairs. The first 4 stairs go pretty well, but we know the back wheels are about to go up. I've dealt with large people and stairs before, but this was a different demon. There was really only enough room for 1 person on the stairs, so I volunteered to try. We made it maybe 2 steps before his body shifted on the cot and he started to slide back. We brought him back down and ended up calling the fire department. The fire department brought 10 guys. We tied off the cot and tried to make it up the stairs again, but it just wasn't going to happen. The fire chief and my funeral home director told us to wait, and we went to talk to the family upstairs. After a while, the chief came down with a saw and told us we're making a door. We cut a hole in the side of the wall, wheeled him out, and put an end to the longest removal of my career. One of the firefighters was a woodworker and he came back that day and fixed up the wall in the basement. I showed up to the fire station that day with 5 pizza pizzas, and a case of beer. TLDR, we had to cut a hole in the basement wall to get a large body out. Firefighters are amazing. Next story. Not me, but my cousin. He works at a funeral home and helps pick up bodies, do the preservation steps, and makeup. Anyway, this is the most disturbing story he told me. There was this about 30-year-old woman who came into the place and planned out, then paid for her whole funeral. Few mornings pass, then my cousin gets a call from the boss telling him he needs to go pick up a body. It was the same woman. My cousin asks where the body is, and the boss replied with, "Out back." Turns out the lady had planned to take her own life. She paid for the whole funeral, laid out a big tarp behind the building, and used a gun to do the deed. The silver lining is my cousin said it was really easy to clean up, but that story still haunts me. Okay, sorry, surely this is obviously a big red flag, right? I feel like if someone goes in and pays for their own funeral, you should have to call someone. To me, the message is loud and clear, but maybe it's more common than I think. Anyway, horrifying. Next story. I'm not a coroner, but my uncle, rest in peace, was. I've got two stories. The first story has my uncle working this morgue in, I think, California. He was deputy chief coroner of San Francisco, just not at this time yet. So he's in some podunk town when the bodies are getting stacked up. Apparently something happened and it caused a surge of deaths in the little town. Kind of screwed up, but so is life. Now, this town's morgue was tiny, definitely not built for mass casualties, probably in the 70s or 80s too. The place only had 2 or 3 cold storage slabs, so as per my uncle, those up in the pecking order from my uncle, stored the bodies upstairs on gurneys. When my uncle was done with the bodies on the slabs, he would go upstairs to retrieve the next poor guy. Now, here's the kicker. It was dark as hell up there, no light. But there were windows and it's California, so why, with windows, was there no light? Flies. Freaking flies. They were so thick on the windows, they literally blocked out the sun. My uncle didn't work there long after that, but by God, he was a man of solid work ethic. Second story. My dad would help my uncle out on certain jobs. This was at a different mortuary, mind you, and in the 70s or so. So the local retirement home gives the place a call and says, "We've got another one," or some crap like that. So my uncle asks my dad to come help him get a body from the home. My dad says okay, and they hop into the coroner vehicle and arrive at the home. They walk into the room, and on one bed lies a motionless individual. On the other, of 2 beds in the room, another motionless individual. They grab one of them, as per what they've been told, and begin rolling her out the door. Suddenly, the caretaker comes barreling out of the joint screaming, "It's not her! She's still alive!" They grabbed the wrong person. The one they grabbed was very much alive, and the one on the other bed was the dead one. To be fair, though, my uncle did mention that back in the day, and I imagine it occurs today as well, doping the living crap out of the elderly to make them sleep all day until they're dead was a thing that happened. So differentiating a living, albeit comatose person from a dead one was really hard until they could do the official time of death test at the mortuary. I guess there was really no need back in the day. Man, people must have lived by the seat of their pants back then. To be clear though, as I've basically shown my uncle in a terrible light, he was a great person. The dude was stoic, wise, and definitely a lover of many women. Dude liked his gals, man. He'd call out bullcrap as well. And for the record, yes, he chose his own personalized mortician work for himself after death. He was ill and knew it was coming, so he made personalized plans. Extra large casket, no shoes on him, not to be embalmed. I guess his reasoning was that what does a dead guy need to do with shoes? The extra large casket wasn't because he wanted to be comfortable. He was a very broad-shouldered individual. As for the lack of embalming, he wanted to return to the earth as fast as possible. Next story. One of my relatives used to pick up bodies for the morgue. While there were plenty of unsettling scenarios involving the bodies themselves, the creepiest thing was him discovering that some acquaintances of his were necrophiliacs. Once they found out about his job, a couple of people actually asked if he'd let them have some time alone with the bodies, and made their intentions clear with some innuendo. Needless to say, he refused, and those ties were cut immediately. Next story. Not a mortician, but my father is. Occasionally, I hear some pretty screwed up things. The worst one was about 10 to 15 years ago. Some good old boy was backing his 18-wheeler up and getting ready to hook onto a trailer. Somehow, in the process of trying to get locked in, the hydraulics failed and the trailer rolled back, crushing this guy to death. Upon arrival to pick up the body, my dad approaches the scene and there are a bunch of cops standing around. He goes up to them to get info on where the body was. They all just casually mumble and proceed to explain finally that, there's a problem. The majority of the body was able to retrieve just fine, but not the head. It had gotten stuck on the front pin of the trailer, and none of them knew how to get it off. My dad, having seen it all, stares all these guys down, goes up to the trailer, literally kicks the head off the end of this pin, scoops it up into his bag, and heads for the car. As he passes by the cops, he just mumbles barely enough for anyone to hear them. Cowards. Next story. I've been in the body business for 5 years and I have a lot of screwed up stories, but I'll share this one. I got a call for pickup at a hospital. The dispatcher said to bring 2 or 3 people because he was around 600 pounds. I get there and look at his paperwork and it turns out this guy was only about 20 years old. The nurse told me something I'll never forget. He had no congenital illnesses. This meant the kid ate so much that he got too fat to move by the time he was 18, and somehow someone was providing enough food for him to get over 600 pounds barely out of puberty. When I got back to the crematorium with him, I weighed him on the floor scale, and he was exactly 666 pounds. I couldn't make this crap up. 666 pounds is a lot. By 20 years old, this guy barely got a chance to live, man. This has got to count as some kind of negligence on the parents' part, right? Because I'm assuming from 18 to 20 was not the gain of about 500 pounds. This seems like a work in progress. I feel terrible for him, really. I think some authority figures in his life must have really screwed up here. Next story. I spent some time picking up bodies for the medical examiner. There are many stories, some of my own and some of those who I worked with. One, which is usually popular, is that of a woman who died on her own in the reservation town. We arrived and the cop on scene was quite disgusted with the place. He was looking forward to be deployed back to Afghanistan to get away from this town. The house when we arrived was an older house with several stories. The fence outside had been driven through by a car at some point. It was a night, of course. We entered the house and it was a complete mess. She was obviously a bit of a hoarder. I've seen much worse hoarders in the job, but she was on her way there. There was stuff piled everywhere. You couldn't tell what the floor was actually covered in because of all the garbage and paper and stuff ground into the floor. Probably hardwood underneath as it felt so fairly solid, but tough to say for sure. The second floor was up a spiral staircase and she was upstairs. Before we went up there, the cop told us the dogs had got her a little bit. We worked our way up the spiral staircase to the door that he had just indicated she was behind. When we opened the door, there was a body sitting in an office chair facing the door. However, it was a skull on top of a body. The dogs had eaten all of the skin off of her head. They also ate her breasts, and the implants from her breasts were on the floor. She had several small dogs. They had started eating each other before her, so there were bones from at least one, probably 2 dogs scattered around. She had died and wasn't able to feed the dogs, obviously, so they turned on each other and then her. The guy I was with started freaking out a little bit. It was a fairly disgusting sight, well beyond the average call we went to. We were trying to figure out how to get her out of the chair. She was decomposed, of course, so she was covered in blisters that bodies get covered in as they decompose. We have to gather as much of the body as we can, so we grabbed her implants and what was left of her scalp with the hair attached off the floor. You don't want to pop those blisters if you can avoid it. They are putrid when they leak out. In my partner's state of not knowing what the hell to do with her, he decided that the easiest way to get her out of the chair was kick the chair out from under her. So he did. She came crashing to the floor, and the blisters burst. It was now a horrible mess of oozing pus. We had our portable stretcher, as we obviously weren't going to bring the one with wheels up the spiral staircase. We generally don't bring that up staircases at all, really. We set up the body bag and loaded her in. Of course, some of the fluids and whatnot got on the outside of the body bag. We loaded her onto the stretcher and carried her out of the house. She stank up the minivan all the way back to the city. It was winter and quite cold out, but we had to drive with all the windows down to try to survive the odor. Oh my god. We were so far in. We've done so many stories. I thought we were safe from anything super gross. How foolish I am for thinking that we could get through a thread of dead bodies without something truly revolting. Ugh. And with only a few more to go, too. Next story. On a pathology rotation at the county medical examiner's office and medical school, this included some site visits. We got called to a house that had been reported to have a horrible smell coming from inside. Cops had found the owner who had died 3 weeks prior in the middle of summer. This person was a hoarder. House was full of old cans of cat food, newspapers going back decades, and VHS adult content tapes. Did the autopsy that afternoon in a special containment room. Body was absolutely full of all manners of insect life. Bugs, beetles, flies, roaches, everything. The smell was horrendous. I still get the willies thinking about all those bugs pouring out, running around on the floor, flying around the room, etc. Next story. When my dad was a med student back in the 90s, he took a job harvesting organs/body parts from donors. On one of his first cases, he was required to cut the head off of a corpse using a chainsaw-like tool. He had nightmares about it for a while. It really screwed with him, as it should. Hopefully, no one would feel indifferent about that kind of thing. There was also another time in which the only body parts returned to a donor's family were the man's feet. Weird stuff. These are the only things coming to mind right now, but he has seen some crap. Next story. Here's another weird one. My dad was working a burial at the cemetery. They were doing a family prayer type thing around the grave site. A deer tried to jump the fence of the cemetery and impaled itself on the spiked fence right in the middle of their burial. We also had a woman take her own life in our backyard. We lived next to the funeral home where my dad worked. The two garages were separated by a patch of grass. I got up to drive my two sisters to school. I was in college and they were in high school still. I drive them to school and go back home since I didn't have classes that early. I pulled up to the house and there were police cars everywhere. What the hell happened? Apparently, my dad's secretary found the body of an older woman who had taken her own life on that patch of grass. The same patch of grass I had to drive by to leave the parking area. I drove right past her and didn't see it. Apparently, the old woman didn't have any family and had a pre-arrangement at my dad's funeral home, and so decided to deliver herself. Surely the deer thing is a terrible omen, right? I would assume I was cursed. I would. If that happened at a funeral I was attending, I'm like, oh, a witch has gotten us all. Oh well. Next story. My cousin works for a funeral home that embalms the bodies. Body of an Australian heavyweight was brought in. Guy was all muscles and was covered in his own waste. He had to go get the body, and when they came close to him, the body sat straight up, looked around, spoke gibberish, and just fell on the floor. The saddest thing about this was that his wife put him in the cellar and chained him to his bed. They found him after there were so many complaints about the smell emanating from their house. A bloater, body of a recent high school graduate. He was found in a shallow part of a river, and he was so pale and full of water. His uncle had ended him because the majority of his relatives were jealous that he got into a good college as a teacher's aide. This one is about the only client my dad ever had that died while he was on the job. His name was Joe. Joe loved to eat anything inedible. It was a compulsion. They had pumped his stomach so many times because of the amount he would eat. He had his own room and he wasn't allowed to have anything that could fit in his mouth. Joe was dying, so his relatives visited him. The doctor allowed them to give him whatever he wanted because it wasn't going to change anything. His autopsy was like opening a disgusting piñata. He apparently couldn't poop because he had swallowed so many solid objects, some of which were plastic wrappers, bottle caps, a rubber duck, cotton balls, sponges, Lego pieces, and even doll heads. I mean, okay, it's a thread that specifically says most bizarre, uncomfortable, or creepy, whatever, and yet somehow I'm still surprised by stuff like this. It caught me a bit. It caught me off guard, especially as a final story. Hope you enjoyed it, I guess. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.